faces popping up now. So welcome. This is our 7th edition of the Isle of Man Sport coaching development program. We've had some fantastic guests already with Sergio and with Amy, and of course our lovely host Juan, or Juan, as we know him in the Isle of Man. And tonight it's good to see we've got some familiar faces coming back again. So it really speaks volumes about how much you value these sessions to come back and get even more fantastic learning. So we've got Mr. Whiting. Welcome, John, from hockey. We've got Juan or Juan Watney from football. Welcome, Juan. We've got Heather. Fantastic. I'm glad Heather's managed to get on board. It's your first one tonight, Heather, from swimming. Claire. Loads of people come on now. So we've got Claire from netball again. Who else we got for your list? Nigel Armstrong. We've got an endurance runner, Nigel. So great to see you along, Nigel. I noticed you on the list a few weeks back, so I'm glad you could get here in person as well. So brilliant. So tonight, guys, we've got a real special treat for you. We've got a fantastic speaker with a lot of experience to draw upon. I'll let Juan do a more detailed intro, but Stuart Armstrong is tonight's guest, who is, I believe, the head of coaching at Sport England and is the owner of the Talent Equation website and podcast, which I think has been running now since about 2017. So if you like your podcasts, get along to the Talent Equation podcast. It's fantastic. And there are literally 4 years worth of back catalogue to get through there with some fantastic speakers, many of whom haven't looked through it and listened to many of them as well. Have visited the Isle of Man to do some of our programs. So there'll be some familiar faces for you there as well. But Juan, can you give us your full bio and hit on our brilliant guest tonight?
Well, we might need an extra hour for that. We might need to stay longer. Let's do a Zoom version of that in just a sec. Well, welcome everyone once again. Great to see some familiar faces. Great to have some new people on board. And welcome to everyone that is watching the recording as well. If you've been here for the last number of weeks now, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many, but this is our 7th gathering. Is that right, Trev? Something like that, which is great. You would know that you'll get an email after the conversation, with the recording, with the resources and the contact email, in this case, and the contact details, beg your pardon, from Stuart. There'll be a bunch of authors that I'm sure Stuart will be calling out tonight and some resources, and I'll try my best to write them down and send them over to you on that email for the at least 10th time. That email is going to land in your spam inbox, promotions, junk, however you got your filters configured. It is most likely, I would say almost 100%, that it will land there. So please have a little dig around, and I'm sure it'll be there somewhere. As usual, share the love on social media, please. That'll be fantastic. And once again, massive thank you to Trevor and Isle of Man Sports for putting this on together, which is an A-team, A-league lineup. That is for certain. Stu, mate, how are you? It's great to have you back in one of these. How's everything?
It's all good, Juan. All good. It's Friday.
It's Friday. You're already finished.
Very close to beer o'clock. So I'm very much looking forward to this chat.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm glad you're back in the Finnish sauna. And what's the temperature in there? Just let us know. You're winning.
If I'm honest, it's getting a little bit toasty. I'm going to have to turn the heating down.
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
It's all good.
Well, mate, as usual, it's great to have these conversations. We had, I think, one every other week for the last few weeks, which is fantastic. And every time we finish, my head is hurting a little bit. My brain feels like it's going to explode. So just buckle up, because you're in for the ride now. So mate, do you want to start with where Trevor left? Just give us your Zoom version of your bio, if that's possible somehow.
Happy to do that. Hello everybody. Nice to be here. Nice to see John again. The last time I saw John, I got sent over to the island by England Hockey, and it's etched in my memory because the first night was some of the most interesting weather I've ever done coach development in. Do you remember that, John? You're on mute, my friend. John, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm back now. Yeah, I do remember that very well. And then we ended up in a classroom the next day when we probably shouldn't have been inside for much, but it was still pretty horrendous the next day.
Everybody was thawing out and dripping out and all that jazz. It was, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience, but fun nonetheless. Yeah, so as Trevor said, by day I wang on about coaching in a professional capacity at Sport England, usually talking about things like coaching policy and stuff like that, and regulation and improving qualification systems. And then at night, I wang on about coaching in either recording podcasts and producing them or doing coach development sessions like this. So very much looking forward to chatting to you. And I'm actually looking forward to, as we've got quite a nice sort of mixed group, an intimate group, I thought we can, rather than me wang on all night, I'll start off and throw a few things out there and do the usual kind of conversation that we would have, and then open it up and start a dialogue with the group, if that suits you.
Yes, absolutely. Did you say hi to the fairies when you were in the island?
I did, yes, okay, obviously.
Just checking. We don't want to bring any bad luck to his conversation, so there you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Go ahead. What have you got for us? I mean, the title of the evening is quite a nibbling one for people that wanna buy tonight, and I know you've had lots of, let's call them, encounters with lots of people that have actually bid on it, and they're probably still hooked on to that rod, which is absolutely fine. Ditch those drills. If you haven't seen the flyer, that's probably your, I don't know what to call it. Is it your motto? Is it your lemma? Is it your catchphrase? Well, how did that come about?
I think it's probably going to be my epitaph.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's definitely become a bit of an association with me. Two things: either ditch those drills or the war on drills. It's kind of what I'm a little bit known for, if you like. My desire to rid the world of the drill, the dreaded drill. Okay, so let me just explain myself before everybody switches off and goes and finds something much more interesting to do. I for quite some time I have been I guess sort of, I want to put a challenge out to coaches out there, and I want to challenge them to say, our job is obviously, primarily to support players on their development journey. But I would always want to challenge people to do that in as player-centered or athlete-centered or child-centered a way as you possibly could. And let's all face it, if we were to ask a group of kids, or if we left a group of kids to their own devices in whatever domain we have, it's highly unlikely that they would come up with some kind of isolated, repetitive movement pattern as their primary thing that they want to do for enjoyment. Having said that, I wish I had the video. I wasn't able to take a video because I was driving, but the other day I was driving past our local park, and a couple of boys had gone in there to do exercise. They'd have been about 12, 13, because you're allowed to do exercise. And they'd done, they had taken with them a load of these poles, the poles that get you stick in the ground and you sort of do agility and stuff through. Not agility, change of direction. Very big difference. And there was two of them, and they had footballs, but they decided that these poles stuck in the ground, they were going to dribble through them instead of like just having a 1v1 or something. Dumbfounded. What? Why would you do that? And it's probably because that's what they think they should do. That's what they are expected to do, or what they've been taught to do. Anyway, I didn't stay. I was driving past, so I didn't get to see how long they did it for. But anyway, I want to challenge the coaching community to actually look at how we can how we can provide meaningful sports experiences. I believe we have two roles as coaches. And those two roles are often in tension. And the two roles are, we want to help individuals on a developmental journey that meets their needs, whatever they're looking for. But most importantly, if I had to have primacy over one or the other, we need to provide young people with sporting experiences that are so engaging and so meaningful that they would do it on their own, and they would be as engaged in sport and physical activity as they are in video games. Now, the problem we face in our world is we're not in competition with each other. Sports aren't in competition with each other. We're in competition with wider societal attempts to take our children's attention away from us. No word of a lie, today, my wife took delivery of a Peloton bike. My daughter she's got a bike and we go out for bike rides from time to time, but after about half a mile, she's only 9, but after about half a mile, she starts to moan. Oh, it's in my legs. But she has just ridden around New Zealand on that Peloton. Why? Because it was fun and there was music and it felt a bit like a game and it was exciting and it was new. I mean, don't get me wrong, the novelty will wear off by tomorrow. But for now, she's engaged. And this is the challenge that we face, right? Is that kids are actually really engaged by video games. During lockdown, my boy is into video games like most boys are. And he goes up there and he's having an absolute whale of a time in his bedroom playing with his friends online. It's the kind of lockdown and Generation C, the connected generation version of going out to play. Kids nowadays don't really go out to play. They don't have the same freedoms we had, but they get together online and create worlds, or they get together online and they try and chase each other with imaginary guns or whatever it is that they do. And he is whooping and hollering and they are laughing and they are screaming at each other and all that sort of stuff. And that is modern day childhood. But he is having a great time in his free time, in his spare time. And he is being creative and they are free and they have an opportunity to explore in their own way. And my big concern is when we bring them to our world, we make it like school. And the reason we make it like school is because we always say to them, but you've got stuff to do and you've got stuff to learn and you've got stuff to develop on and we've got to improve. So we're going to use these training forms that are designed to improve you. Now, the problem with drills for me is they're an artifact. They're an artifact of the past. They're an artifact of the Industrial Revolution. They're an artifact of military training. In the world of the military, for a long time, soldiers were for a long time, we're told the idea behind military training was you wanted obedience, you wanted people to act without questioning, and you wanted them to be able to respond to orders, because lives were at risk. Military nowadays understand that actually what you want is soldiers who can think and soldiers who can solve problems, because battlefield is an adaptable space, and actually the requirement is very often to make decisions under high levels of stress and duress. So they've changed their model quite considerably. But we're still using that training form. The drill it was designed by the military to get repetitive movement so that it becomes, in theory, automatic. It's based around an information processing consideration of the way sport and physical of the way people learn things, which is they become repetitive. They need to do them through rote memory and build muscle memory and repetition after repetition after repetition. And then the idea is we take these repetitions once we've grooved these things and we put them into context. Well, there's a different way of looking at this. There's a different way of seeing it. And that alternative is to actually say, you know what? There's a thing called a game, or there's a thing called sport, or there's a thing called our event or our competition, and it's going to ask us to solve some problems. And whilst we're in the process of doing that activity, we'll discover some things that we need to explore more, and we'll go and solve those problems. And I believe that gives us an opportunity not to have this trade-off between enjoyment and development, because what we can now create is an environment that fosters both enjoyment, creativity, exploration, and development at the same time. The development is the byproduct of the exploratory experience. What an amazing thing. So we develop skill through exploration within an environment. That's a really interesting concept. And by doing so, we make it absorbing, engaging, exciting, fun, etc., etc. So we don't need drills anymore. They're just a lack of imagination, in my view. We can just create something more engaging without doing a great deal. And you go from something that was boring and repetitive and prescribed. And by the way, to define a drill for you, it's something that's designed to be literally repetition of movement pattern, prescribed movement. There's no decision-making component. There's no element of an individual saying, you know, I'm going to move in this way because of this in the environment. It's purely, you will do this movement until you can do this movement over and over again. That's a drill. It's mindless repetition. The idea being automaticity comes. We don't want automatic players. We want players who can make decisions. If you want automatic players, then we're not going to be long until we've got the AI capabilities to do that. So actually just wait for a while and then get your remote controls out and bingo. Anyway, I've wanged on long enough, but that's my kind of opening salvo around the drill concept.
Hopefully it won't be the last time you do that tonight. In I think it was 2015. Every time, by the way, every time we do these conversations with Stuart, we try to throw things at each other, not to put us on the spot, but just to keep the dialogue fluent. And in 2015, I came across this book. It's called Make It Stick. There's 3 authors there at the bottom. One of them is Brown, and I'm sure Stuart has read it, and I'm sure quite a few of you have come across it in different environments. Some of them might have been related with sports, but Brown and his colleagues in the book, they talk about transition, which for me back in 2015, that was a big click between what Stuart has just described, between that environment of let's go and repeat a pattern of movement, and then let's try to get that into an environment of execution, such as a game, a match, etc. So, any thoughts around transition within learning, Stu, that you go going through your head?
When you say transition, do you mean transfer?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mean the idea of how transferable a practice is to the game or the environment that we're going to compete in?
Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah. Well, the thing about transfer is there's not strong enough evidence to suggest transfer takes place in very many scenarios. But one of the things that they have discovered in a number of different sporting contexts is when you do things that in sort of like a block repetition kind of way, and then try and transfer it into some sort of competitive environment under stress, it tends to break down more readily than something that's been learned in a more representative environment. So when you have they've done studies with like basketball shooting, which is obviously quite a closed scenario, but they've done studies where they learn to do it in a block repetition, do it over and over again, get loads of reps. And then they did it randomly where, you might have a couple of shots and then do something else. Then you have a couple of shots and do something else, and they do different ways. And they've learned that from a retention standpoint, in terms of both can probably perform it then and there. If you were to just do a load of practice and then do a test, both would do roughly okay. The repetitive one, in fact, the sort of technique-led one, would probably do slightly better because of the number of attempts that they've had. But when it comes to retention, like a week later, if you do the same test, what you find is that the random practice, or the more variable the practice is, the more it sticks. So from a transfer perspective, there's a really interesting viewpoint here that actually people tend to think that variability is an issue. It's a problem. It creates noise. It creates distraction for the athlete. But in reality, and this was something Andrew Wilson said to me on the podcast a couple of years ago now, he said people think variability is noise and distraction, but actually variability is signal. We need the variability to give us the specifying information to determine how we need to act in the environment. And so actually, no two movements are ever the same. We always think we can try and make something in like a basketball shot or something. Try and make it repetitive so that we can do it over and over again. The reality is it's never the same. It's always got micro variability built into it. So we need to learn to practice to appreciate that variability, whether it's a micro variability or high levels of variability. And we need to practice in those contexts in order to enable transfer or better enable transfer. Stands to reason though, doesn't it really? They talk about representative practice. You want practice to equate the competitive environment to give the athlete the chance of whatever they're learning or developing, they're doing so in an environment that nearly equates to the competitive activity, or is at least some representation of the activity. If you do something very isolated with none of the variables in place, then it's really difficult to get an individual to have to do something. And what you'll probably notice as well, when people do isolated movements, and if you were to compare someone doing an isolated exercise, no pressure, no opponent, this, that, and the other, versus an exercise under some form of duress or stress, whether it's on the clock in a running context or something, so you're creating some sort of pressure scenario, what you'll find is the movements are different. When you look at them and you analyze them, the way people move is just different. And so what then happens then is people learn a movement in isolation. They take it into a competitive context and they have to relearn it. So it's a massive waste of time. But we think we're doing the athlete benefit. Now, does that mean I never ever work in a isolated way? No. I do work in an isolated way, but work in an isolated way, when someone has discovered something they can't quite solve in the chaos of the game. So I'll give them some space. I very rarely do it entirely isolated. I'll often act as an opponent while they're exploring a different movement possibility. Or I'll say to them, here's something for you to think about and go away. And when you haven't got everybody else around you in a team context or a training group, you need to think about and work on your own. And we can create a practice form that you can use. So that whole concept of transferability, Juan, is an interesting area. But the evidence suggests that the more representative the activity, the stronger, and the more variable the activity, ironically, it seems sort of counterintuitive, the stronger the transfer.
Cool. Yeah, it was transfer what I wanted to say. That was my Spanish brain thinking in Spanish on a Friday afternoon. Another great resource, and actually you mentioned basketball. They use a lot of examples from basketball for you to go and research a little bit. Is Train Ugly, trainugly.com. Trevor, another great Trevor. It's not King Trevor. Is the other Trevor, is Trevor Reagan. They got lots of really cool videos and really cool resources. This one about tigers, which I think is fantastic, how different tigers learn, and it's a great irony. It's a great comparison as well, which is great. So go and have a look. I'll send you that in the email as well. So Stuart, how does this work in what is normally known, I said normally within inverted commas, you're known as individual sports? So your sort of fencing, I know Heather is from swimming. You mentioned that isolated shot in basketball. Claire is from netball. So how does that work? How does that short corner in your sports, hockey, how does that work within everything you just sort of mentioned to us in the last 20 minutes? So
yeah, so that's a good question, and I get asked that a lot. And it works in almost exactly the same way. So there's a fundamental difference between working utilizing an ecological learning framework. So I ascribe to, I guess, a theoretical framework which is referred to as ecological dynamics, which is basically it articulates the way humans have learned through the millennia. By adapting to changes to the environment. It's how we've essentially survived and been able to, make it to the top of the food chain, so to speak. And learning through adaptation, learning through responses to changes in the environment is something that is a very natural way for humans to learn. We think we sort of ourselves through a reconceptualization and through some cognitive psychological theory that we think we can shortcut that by using these sort of rote memorization techniques in an education context. And some of those ideas have migrated across into sports. And so what we've done is, instead of like rote memorization in an educational context, to like memorize facts or numbers or whatever, or equations, we try and use that in a sporting context, in the complexity that is sporting competition. And we think that through the training of through repetitive training, rote kind of repetition of movement patterns, that we can somehow then make people skillful. But skill is, there's an interesting perspective on this. So the ecological approach suggests that we work backwards from the competition, i.e., what is the task that we're asked to tackle, and then we devise our training forms linked as closely to the task as we possibly can. And so we're task-led, context-led. Whereas the more traditional linear approach, information processing approach, the sort of kind of the what is commonly taught within most coach education, the idea of the what Fitz and Posner talked about as the going from the cognitive stage to the autonomous stage, and all those sorts of things. That traditional approach works the other way and says, right, we're going to develop technique, and then we're going to apply that technique to context. And the assumption is that the aggregation of technique forms skill. The ecological contention is that the aggregation of technique forms technique applied in context, which is something different from skill. Skill has inherent adaptability to it, because we know that the environment is unpredictable, and things are going to happen in any environment which is unpredictable, and therefore the ability of the athlete to adapt to the unpredictability forms their skillful performance. So very famously, and I will probably butcher this story, but I believe Michael Phelps is a famous story that his coach had him training with either broken goggles deliberately or something along those lines, to get him to swim for the moment when something went wrong and his eyes filled up with water, and yet he still had to win. And I believe he swam a world record with goggles full of water. Am I wrong with that? Who's our resident swimming coach? Who is that a story that you've heard before, Heather, or am I making that up completely? Sorry, I can't hear you.
That's true. It's a true story.
I thought it was. I wasn't making it up. I'm glad I wasn't.
It goes along the lines, if you prepare for the unexpected, it's not going to be such a shock.
There you go. So that's exactly but that's based on this idea that actually skillful performance is about dealing with unexpected things, or dealing or adapting to things that might happen, and preparing yourself for those kinds of eventualities so that you understand something about those things. So instead of spending hours and hours and hours just purely and simply working on technique, in a swimming context, we'd say a less accomplished swimmer, more a learner, what we might do is design tasks that are derived from the activity that they're likely to be involved in. So with a sprinter, for example, and Mel Marshall uses this approach, and Ollie Logan, who works within the British swimming context, he's one of their sports scientists, has been on the podcast to talk about this before. And he works with Mel to devise practice tasks and to help her design practice tasks for Adam, to talk about or explore different ways that he might gain advantage in his space, right? So for example, they identified fairly early on that one of his things was turns. He was losing quite a bit of time on that, so they devised practice tasks on turns, not the technique of turning, just let's time you doing various forms of turn and see which ones give you a better propulsion and also a quicker transition off the wall. And then they discovered, with him providing the feedback back to them, the ways he could feel this sort of stuff. So this is what we would do with a younger athlete. We're allowing them to explore and develop different ways of going at a particular task, so that they can start to develop an understanding of how they might be able to improve. So there's and that's one of the other fundamental shifts, which is, in a linear conception, the coach is the knower. The coach has the knowledge, and the job of the coach is to give the knowledge to the athlete who is perceived to have none or little or less. And the idea is that the coach gives declarative knowledge to the athlete, and the athlete takes on the declarative knowledge and executes the action according to the declarative knowledge, the instruction provided by the coach as to the proper technical way of doing something. In the non-linear approach, what we do is we say to an athlete, here's some things to explore. Here's some parameters within which to explore those things, which can be very constrained or very open. And within those parameters, let's see what you discover about ways of moving through water in this case, and see which ways feel really strong to you or feel like give you maximum propulsion, and we'll time it and all those sorts of things. So the learning is very much coming from the athlete. The athlete is the knower, the coach is the guide. Whereas in the technical model, or the technique-led linear model, the coach is the knower and the coach is the one responsible for the development. And one of the challenges with this whole approach, by the way, is coaches get very attached to being the knower, and the ego becomes associated with the knowing. And so when you work in a different way, where the athlete is the knower, the athlete is the one who is learning, and you are no longer the knower, then all of a sudden you are, well, what's your role? And from an ego perspective, that's an interesting thing to address, which one of the things I think is very challenging about it. So anyway, there's a really great piece of research by a guy called Ludovic Seifert, if you want any proof of this, who's done loads of brilliant research in things like climbing and certainly in aquatics. And I can't remember exactly the findings of his research, but basically the sort of long and short of it was, they did some testing with a load of learners, like novice swimmers learning to swim. And they gave them some variable practice forms, and then they gave them technique-led practice forms. And the massive difference in speed of learning, actual propulsive capabilities, their ability to be able to stay buoyant, etc., just huge differences. I'll have to try and dig out the study from somewhere. I have no idea where it is. But if you look up Ludovic Seifert on somewhere like ResearchGate or academia.edu, you will probably find his research. He's done a lot in this space, and it's quite interesting in what you might call the non-invasion sport context.
Yeah, and I think he beats you around cynical and ironic performance. He's one of the most cynical men I've come across in the best possible way of the world. He's actually hilarious when he's talking about drills and all those bits that you mentioned over there. I've got some stuff from him, and I'll send you across some stuff from Davis. I'll send you across some stuff from Renshaw, and I'll send you across some stuff from Shuttleworth as well. So some authors with some research behind them coming your way. I've got one more for you, Stuart, and hopefully this will trigger the conversation. We got just under half an hour to go. I'll give you one word. If you're allowed to give me a phrase, no more than a sentence on it. Do you want to do this?
Yeah, go ahead.
ABCs stroke basics.
No such thing.
Muscle memory.
No such thing.
Oh, you're not allowed to repeat, obviously. Come on.
Oh, okay. Okay. Muscles don't have brains.
Drills in safety.
Drills
around safety.
Yeah, doing drills in order to teach safe technique, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Really dangerous, have the opposite effect.
Oh wow, that's a bomb right there. 10,000 hour rule.
is not a rule. It's an average. It's not about practice quantity. It's about practice quality. So read the research, not the Gladwell book.
Got you. Tackle shields, stroke, bowling machines.
Fun, nothing more. Frivolity.
Cool. I've got the last one. Pro teams or professional teams / what we will see on TV.
In comparison to what should happen in the kind of recreational space.
Yes, if you want to take it that way, yes.
Bears no resemblance.
Cool. There you go. Thanks for that. And I know there's a lot more that you want to say about all of them.
I think that stimulated some responses. I could see some faces there, so I'm interested. Some people want to quiz me on that.
Come on, then. I'm sure they want to. Should be able to open your mics or just pop something in the chat. Entirely up to you.
Or hand up. Come on in.
Yeah.
Go on, I'm in. So, muscle memory.
Yeah.
Proprioception is a thing. So, is it more to do with that term muscle memory as being misinterpreted by people, and it's used as to aid people in understanding the thing of proprioception? So to go, right, give this a go because this is how it is, and it's a basic catch-all, and they don't understand the implications of that moving forward, maybe.
Yeah, that's a nice nuance, which my little pithy one-liner doesn't do justice to. Yeah, now the danger with something like muscle memory is it sort of takes us to this kind of rote repetition world. The assumption being is do it. It becomes ingrained in the muscle memory. We don't want that. We don't want automaticity. What we want is the exquisite micro adaptability that a truly attuned individual has. So attunement to the environment is essential for skilled performance, because our athletes are always attuning to variables and adapting to them. We want to help them with becoming expert at that. So if we try and say we want to ingrain into muscle memory, you're right, proprioception is exactly what we want, really perfect. We want to actually attune them to proprioception. We want them to sense movement. So using my swimming analogy from earlier on, we want them to be able to tune to the movement of fluid dynamics. We want them to attune to how they propel themselves through water and maintain buoyancy. And we want them to have a real in-depth understanding of the sensations associated with fluid dynamics. That's the proprioception. If you go down that just repeat the movement action, you become detuned from the proprioception, because all you're doing is trying to repeat the action as instructed. So it's a beautiful question, and it actually beautifully exposes the fundamental difference between the ecological conception and the opposite.
There you go, Juan. You get a Snickers. Well done. Question of the evening. Heather, over to you. How are you? Great to have you here.
Thank you. So in terms then of muscle memory, are you looking more towards like the hierarchy of competences?
Expand on that if you wouldn't mind, Heather. What do you
mean? Where you start with unconscious incompetence and go through to unconscious competence as a set that you go through.
Yeah.
Is that how you mean? Rather than muscle memory. So you go from the unconscious to the conscious, back to the unconscious.
Do I think that unconscious to the conscious, back to the unconscious? That's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I want to say maybe. Well, the hierarchy.
Do you know the model? Do you?
I do. Yeah, the hierarchy of competencies is similar to Fitz and Posner's model around the kind of almost like that linear approach towards competence. The idea being we want to be unconsciously competent. So the ecological approach, I think, would reject that, because actually the idea is not to be unconscious. The idea is to be very conscious. hyper aware, but not necessarily in a cognitive processing sense, because cognitive processing, some really good research out this week on that, actually. Cognitive processing is really associated with a breakdown of, if you're thinking about how you do something, it very rarely can you do it. So actually, cognitive processing is not what we want, but neither do we necessarily want people to be entirely unconscious. I mean, if you're unconscious, you're asleep, but subconscious, or, or like, so you're not necessarily processing. But that processing concept is the problem here. What we actually want people to be aware of is there's like 21 human senses. And proprioception being one of them, kinesthesia being another, synesthesia being another. Now, what we want is humans to actually have a real attunement to their sensory possibilities. And actually, through that attunement process, they are able to make micro adaptations or major adaptations, depending on the situation. So I think where you're going with it, I think you're on the right lines, Heather, actually. You're not far off this. But it's got a slightly different approach. It's more about consciously, subconsciously conscious. I don't really know if that's the right way to frame it, but that's the best way I can articulate it for you.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying there. It is, but I think when you get into a competitive situation, you just want people to be able to get in and do. You
absolutely do, but at the same time, what the problem you then have is if they get in and do, like execute phase, and then something changes, like someone else is going quicker than they expected, than their pace, or something, or the start isn't perfect, how do they respond and adapt, or whatever it might be. So you don't want them entirely just to go in there and follow the plan and do. What you want them to be able to do is to go, right, it's not quite where I wanted it to be. What do we do next? How can we respond to that? What's new? What's different? I've been here before. I'm fine. Do you know what I mean? So you sort of want a degree of awareness, but you don't want them to become aware of movement. You want them to become aware of environment and how environment can frame their movement possibility.
But hopefully when they get to that level, they're able to do that because they're so sharp at that point, because everything's so focused and they've visualized everything, hopefully, that they're aware of those nuances and are able to change it in a split when they have to.
Only if they've been provided with those environments to be able to learn about that kind of thing. If they've been desensitized to that because all they've got is someone on the sideline with a whistle and a stopwatch, you wonder then whether they are going to become skillful performers or they're just repetitively. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a place for training, right? Because sometimes it's just about energy systems, not about skill. Fine. But if we're doing skill, then we need something slightly different.
Yeah. But then they can do it. If they get those competitions under their belt, they'll learn each time, use it as a learning curve.
And it's motivational from the training perspective then, in the sense of they understand the problem they're trying to solve and they're motivated to solve it.
Roger Federer would go to events before he took part in them, and he'd find out where all the exits were, if any doors were locked, how he would get onto the court. So he prepares for absolutely everything months before he actually goes, and that's the level he took his preparations to, so that nothing faced him on the day.
Yeah, that's something that's very associated with elite performers in a lot of different spaces.
Well, at least I know what I'm going to tell the horse riding instructor every time he tells my 4-year-old, I want you to do it without thinking. I want you to do it without thinking. Anyway, and I'm biting my tongue on the other end of the arena. Anyway, that's my personal bit for tonight. Who else got something for Stuart? I know there must be loads of bits going around.
Yes, Trevor. You're on mute, my friend.
You should be able to unmute yourself.
There you go. I hit unmute, but I think I double tapped. So going back to Juan's questions before, he was talking about tackle pads and bowling machines.
Yes.
Just to throw a scenario at you, let's say you've got a practice with a team of cricketers, and none of them can bowl 80 miles per hour. Let's say they're all bowling 60, 65. We're in the Isle of Man. We know we've got a player who's looking to get across and play within a talent program or on some sort of pathway somewhere. And they're going to go into an environment where all of a sudden the ball speed is going to become really, really fast. But there ain't no one over here who can bowl that fast to get them to know what that feels like to have that ball coming at them. Granted, they're not going to have the cues coming from a bowler, you know, the positional cues or anything like that, because the machine can't give that. Is there still any value in perhaps using the machine to help give someone that confidence to sort of deal with the speed of ball?
Well, the problem with the bowling machine is it lacks specifying information. So one of the things we know about skillful performance in cricket and in sports that are anticipatory, so they're striking sports that are anticipatory. Bruce Abernathy did this research way back. In tennis, in receiving serve in tennis. And what they discovered was that the eyes don't follow the ball. It's too fast. So actually what the athlete is doing is they're picking up on sort of small cues in the service motion, and they're kind of then like, it's like a read. And they found the same in cricket. It's too fast. The eyes can't follow the ball. Same in baseball. And so what they do is essentially what batters learn to do is to make almost like an approximation of where the ball will be and respond to that approximation. But you need the cue and the information provided by the bowler and the bowler's arm coming over to give you the cue as to whether you might move forward, backward, whatever. And bowling machines don't give you that specifying information. The ball comes out at a certain speed. Now, what you might do then, therefore, it's not perfect, but what you might do is have somebody run up and like pretend to deliver a ball at exactly the time the ball's released out of the bowling machine to give it some level of specifying information. It's not perfect at all, right? So it's an approximation, but you might do that to give it more representativeness. But before we went to that world, that's one way I would deal with it. So knowing that, and the other problem with the bowling machine as well is it actually, what it's designed to do is exactly what you don't want it to do, which is it's designed to actually deliver the ball more or less in exactly the same place, pretty much. And so again, you don't get the natural variability of different lengths, different swings, different, you know. So that's a bit of a challenge. So you want something more representative than that. Is there value to a bowling machine? Well, like, yes, in the sense that it gives you loads of goes, you get lots of reps and this, that, and the other. And you might just want to learn to be able to then, like, you know, kind of respond to that. But if I was going to use a bowling machine, I'd create sort of some sort of additional challenge with it. So, for example, you'd have to score in a certain place. So we'd be working on a kind of shot, really, rather than and how you manipulate the ball to that particular area, even though the ball's delivered here. Or I might give the batter a really thin bat or something, and I use that, you know, so that we're creating like an over destabilization that they have to respond to, or something like that, you know, just to give it that additional variability. They call that differential learning, where you make it extreme, and then when you go back to what you've got, what you would normally have, it feels like it's easier. You know, sometimes use something bigger, something smaller, something whatever. But the way I would do it actually is I'd just get the people who can't bowl at 85 miles an hour to bowl from 18 yards instead of 22. And then the ball comes faster. Now, the problem with that sometimes is it also comes on different steepling bounces, but that might be all right. You might just get short bowlers to bowl as fast as they can. I used to get my brother to do this because he couldn't bowl that fast because he was 2 years younger than me when I was about 15. And I used to get him to come and bowl at me from 14 yards. And I used to have 5 stumps. And I used to put pound coins on the stumps so that if he knocked any of the stumps over, he'd get those pound coins, because he used to get bored of not being able to get me out. Not saying I was brilliant, but I was better than him. And I used to bat with a stump to make it as hard as I possibly could. So A, keep him motivated. B, make the challenge super high for me. And I learned basically if I could late cut the ball with a stump, I was on really good nick as a player. I still do that now. Not the £5, not the £5 coins. I wouldn't be able to. I'd be out of money very quickly. Anyway, long story. So if you've got nothing else, yeah, okay, use a bowling machine, but understand its limitations and then try and use it in a different way that's going to give the athlete something more to work with and something more to utilize. And again, it's about imagination and creativity and exploring different ideas. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you.
Cool. Juan, I think you had something. Or is he gone now? That's Stuart's superpowers. He can read people's minds and answer before they ask.
No, it was that I was thinking about the bowling from closer. So it's still that time bit. Am I not right in thinking that this might be a tennis thing, but in batting and fielding sports like that, the hitter starts their movement before the ball's released. So
That's
actually,
right.
by doing it with a bowling machine, you don't know when the ball's going to come, so your technique changes anyway. So you're learning something that isn't relative to the game.
That's exactly right. You don't get the trigger movement because most batters at that level with a high velocity delivery, 85 miles an hour, they have a trigger movement to get them moving because they can't get moving quick enough. I mean, you can sort of approximate it. The feeder often drops the ball in to look like the arm's coming down, but there's a delay and it just doesn't quite work. I mean, you use that what they call pro batter now, where you have a silhouette of a bowler running up on a screen and then the ball comes out. It makes it a bit better. They've tried to make it more appropriate that way, but they're expensive, so most people haven't got them. You're better off using a dog wanger generally.
Brilliant. Neil, Leslie, intrigued to know which sports you spend most of your time with.
Hockey.
Cool. And you got a broken arm as well. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Good colour as well. Did you get to choose the colour?
Yes, of course. Hockey
Right,
club colours.
Matching colours. Anything going through your head, Leslie? Anything that you want to throw into the mix?
No, I was just thinking more along the lines of the learned procedure. My daughter was with GB kayaking for 2 years, doing sprint kayak. And although they were taught the actual technique, because she came from hockey, she transferred in from hockey as a talent spot. And although they're taught the basic technique, of course, when you get on the water, it's incredibly different according to how the wind is, etc., etc. So a lot of their time in the gym, they were actually on a board, like just a plank balanced on 2 balance balls, and they were juggling at the same time. So they just got used to keeping their balance while they were juggling. It seems simple and basic, but it actually seemed to work, because when they got on the water, as individuals, it worked. But the problem they hit was when they went into the quads, because of course she's a team sport player, so naturally she wanted to try to adapt the team rather than just herself, and that was a bit of an interesting technique, because the others came from gymnastics and God only knows what, so their balance situations were very different. She had a very strong core anyway, but some of them didn't. Some of them had been in horse riding or whatever, and it was quite interesting. But they did it, but not spectacularly well. As individuals, they did better rather than because they could adapt personally rather than in a team situation.
As a cohort, I imagine the coaches in sprint kayak aren't used necessarily to working in a team dynamics way.
No, they're not. She had constant arguments with them. Well,
Yeah.
debates, shall we say, debates about how she would have approached it as a hockey coach, as a PE teacher, how she would have approached getting the others to, well, everybody to work as a team, because they were so used to the individual stuff. But it was interesting anyway.
It's interesting though, again, about like that's an important part of skill in a multi-human context. Even if those, it's not just a question of like, right, you've got 4 humans in a boat who are basically propulsion mechanisms. So they're basically engines. And all you've got to do is put the most powerful engines in a boat and all of a sudden it's going to work. It doesn't work like that. So the dynamics in a team of any kind, in multi-human context, the social dynamics, the psychodynamics between and the interactions between humans, and the ability for them to create flow and the ability for them to create cohesion is absolutely central to performance. And people really underestimate that. And actually, again, I would say this because I'm a bit of a devotee, but well, I'm more than that. But the ecological approach, I think, really gives us scope to work with team dynamics. Like a linear approach is asking people to basically develop their own individual techniques, and then we're going to apply them in context. Whereas the ecological approach, you learn skillful performance with others. So the interaction becomes key, because that defines action. And so you're working backwards from a group dynamic. And then obviously if you throw opponents in there as well. So I've been talking about this quite a bit recently, talking about what are kind of social affordances, the idea of what invitations to act are created through social dynamics and social interaction, what offers are created, what disincentives are created, how do people's personalities connect, how do their interactions connect as a means by which to afford a certain type of invitation to act versus another. Very little research in this, but also very little you don't hear people talk about it very much. You sort of take it for granted, and I think it's a very big and important area of performance.
Yeah, like for her, they quite often put her in one of the front two in the boat, and she's saying, "Stick me at the back, and I can see what's going on ahead of me, and I can talk to the others because I'm used to the team concept." But they insisted that a certain person had to always go at the back, and she was stuck various places, and she did struggle with that to a certain extent. But
did she used to play in defense when she played hockey?
Pardon?
Did she used to play as a defender when she played hockey?
Midfield.
Midfield, so she had people ahead of her. Okay, cool. Good stuff, good stuff. Juan, mate, ask away. Did you see that comment in the chat box, Stuart? Is your chat box open?
I did, but expand away, Juan. I want to understand where you're coming from. I think I know where you're coming from.
So I work in. I say work. I volunteer in the grassroots footy game. I have a senior men's squad. We have a first team and a reserve team sort of format over here. So twice a week, about 26 outfield players plus 2 or 3 goalkeepers. Really, really lucky. Full pitch. Dead lucky to work with what I work with. The players I've got, some of them, I'm thinking of a specific one who plays a lot of basketball, likes repetitive practice. He's a centre forward. He plays as a number 10, and he says we don't do enough finishing practices. And I'm really fortunate that the guy I coach with, we've got a coaching staff of about 3 or 4 who are there each week, but really, really lucky that all of us see the game from the same. And it's for us, a finishing practice is, okay, you're in the box, where's the ball coming from? Where's the defender? Where's the goal? How are you going to deal with it? You're never going to get the same opportunity twice. Whereas his basketball background means he wants repetition. And as much as we've tried to educate him and practice is mainly in the game, he still wants that repetition and tells us off. Normally when he's not having the best of performances himself, and says, I want more finishing at training. And he's a great player and he's brilliant in the game, but he doesn't see the link. He doesn't see, we've tried to use video and lots of other things. He doesn't see that no 2 shots are the same. So how do I meet his psychological needs? I listened to your podcast recently about that. It was about 85. It wasn't about, but one of your comments was about 85-15, the Tiger Woods stuff and what was on the green and what was on the range and really isolating it. But I've only got 2.5 hours a week with them, and I don't feel that in the grassroots setting I can do that. Any advice?
You might have 2.5 hours with him. He's then got the remaining 100 odd, whatever it is, hours in the week when he's on his own to welly balls in a goal.
Yeah.
When you come together with others, we're going to use the others to help us improve that. If he needs loads of time just wellying balls at a goal or a wall or whatever it is, crack on. That's the best time to do 1v0 when there's no one else about. So firstly, you've picked up very quickly that that's just player excuse. I prefer repetitive practice. Why? Because it's my crutch. Yeah, they're using it as an emotional crutch. But having said all that, right, if he wants all that, then again, the other thing is stay behind. And we've heard this before. Loads of stories in football about how the likes of Cantona and Beckham used to stay behind doing free kicks. Stay behind, come early. You know, ask the goalie to come if you want the goalie to stand there and pick the ball out the net for you because it makes you feel brilliant. Crack on. All loads of scope, right? But when we're here and we've got others around us, we're going to take advantage of the fact that they're here because they help us make us better. So that's the first response. I've got a podcast dropping on Monday, which is an Ask Me Anything episode on this subject as well, because I got asked that question by somebody on Twitter. And so I just did a dog walk diary and ranted on for about 30 minutes. But in that, I was saying, look, there are ways, by the way, of delivering that 1v0 kind of opportunity, or 1v1 goalkeeper maybe, but still making it ecologically valid. So, for example, if you were to say vary up the delivery, you know, so for example, let's not just stand there and hit it. It was hit it on the run, hit it on the move, hit it with change of direction, hit it on a whistle so that you've got to move a certain way, hit it on with some sort of distracting variable, hit it after various forms of delivery, bouncing ball, rolling ball, smaller ball, bigger ball, all sorts of variability you could add into a 1v0 environment that would make it ecologically valid. So there's lots of ways of approaching it. What 1v0, by the way, is isolated practice like that, repetitive practice, is perfectly valid within ecological conceptualization. The difference is that you create variability, natural variability, by feeding in different ways, or you create variability by not allowing them just to be static with a static ball. You create some form of representativeness. And that's the only, so you could say, look, I'll give you loads of reps, but we're not going to do repetition with repetition. We're going to do repetition without repetition by giving you variability. Are you okay with that trade-off? But by the way, there's no way somebody's taking all of my practice time just to welly balls at the goal. They can do that before or after.
I nicked an idea that, I think it was a hockey coach he had on, and it was a while ago, but he talked about representativeness in that we've done the analysis and you get 7 shots a game. So you're getting 7 shots in this training session, no more, because that's all you're going to get. And it allows that. So I think that's sort of the approach I've taken. And we do about 15 minutes every 2 weeks to keep a specific group of players happy. But no, thanks.
The one thing I would do though, perhaps though, is maybe create. I do a lot of finishing activity as a hockey coach myself. You know, it's the most important area. But what I do is do it. I give them lots of reps, so they've got a bit more exploratory time. Yeah. Because like they do want to have a go, because you can't really do exploration without enough goes. But what you still want is variability. So, for example, I play a lot of games like call it melee, where it's like 3v3 or 4v2, or something along those lines. But they're just literally going at the goal, or the ball's being delivered in, or whatever it is. You know, and it might be melee, but ball delivered in, and then 3 defenders, 3 attackers. Let's see how we get if we can get the ball on goal, or whatever. Which I imagine you probably do loads of. But you get enough reps of that, and it's got enough representativeness to make it kind of something like the game. You know.
Yeah, do plenty of that. We've got the boys play. They call it the game. So it's 6v6 across 2 18-yard boxes. With a team on the outside, winner stays on. It's chaos and they love it. But yeah, it's stuff like that. But this particular player who springs to mind, and it's only because of your title, Ditch the Drills. He always comes to mind. He wants that repetition. He talks about, in fact, thinking about it, he talks about before he's allowed to do his basketball session, he must score 40 free throws before he's allowed to even start the session. And I said, but the game's different. You know, you talked before about that being within a game context, probably one of the most technique like skills, because there are the fewest variables, and he doesn't see the transfer between the two.
The free throws like a penalty though. So if you want to do, I mean, in basketball, free throws are important because there's a lot of fouls, and therefore getting your free throws does make a difference in terms of winning and losing. So I'd sort of get that. But it's not so. Like for example, I can imagine a basketball context. The equivalent we're talking about here is, like if you had to sort of sink 10 3-pointers before he could start his practice, but clearly he's doing that to start practice. So similarly, you could say to him, right, I'm with you, right, 30 shots on goal with a ball delivered various different ways, and you've got to score 15 of them, otherwise you can't start practice. But we're going to do it beforehand.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll put my hand up there because I mean, it's yes, Stuart, I get it, but when you've got the juniors on before, the ladies on before, you as Stuart's already said, you get 2 hours a week with these guys. I'd say if you got somebody like that, and you give them a ball on the wall and say, "We'll take a ball home with you, find a wall, and you can shoot against that at 6 o'clock, and then come down here at 7 because you're going to be in, as we've said, melee games, rage games. It's the sort of thing we do at hockey. We don't do any of this. Oh, we'll pass the ball and you whack it at the goalie because the goalie will walk off. Bluntly, if I put somebody with 10 balls at the top of the circle and said, right, you're going to smack him at the goalie get no thanks. Can we have a defender in with him? Can we have some sort of variability? Because you're not going to stand there at the top of the circle at the game. You're not going to stand on the 18-yard line. Yeah, you might practice some free kicks, some dead balls maybe in football if somebody, but then you stick a wall in the way and you stick a goalie in the way. And then they, that is realistic. You do get more dead ball shooting opportunities in a game like soccer or a game like hockey. I mean, rugby. If we talk rugby, you do a lot of place kicking. Your kickers would do place kicking because again, it's a very important part. But then they'd have to join in with the whole of the rest of the team because you've got to get the ball to a point where the opposition offend and you get the chance for the place kick. I don't know what I'd say to this guy, but part of it might be we'll go and play basketball then, because I've got another 25 guys that want to play football and want to do this way.
My keeper practices are finishing exercises.
Go ask Leslie about that. She's a keeper. Ask her what she likes as keeper practices. Because I've seen some absolute crackers, and it's particularly ladies hockey and veterans hockey, which are smacking balls from 16 yards most of the time. I have the advantage. One of my sons is a goalkeeper, and if I'm doing anything that he doesn't like, I get to know about it very quickly. And I'm also lucky, and I've got a dedicated goalie coach with the group that I coach with. But they like these little games, 3-on-3, 2-on-2, because it's more shots and more angles. If you hit a ball at my son from 16 yards out, he's going to stop 9.5 out of 10. You've got to be an absolute rocket in the corner, and otherwise he's just going to go, thanks very much, knock it away. But he's much happier when it's, as you said, create these 2-on-1s. You pass the ball in, then the forward is 1-on-1, but it's a different feed every time. It's a different angle every time, different distance every time. My goalies are much happier with that, and the forwards get much more out of that. That's what we play. The small pitch. I mean, what Ewan said, 18-yard boxes. We play up down to about 14 yards, and basically, as soon as it turns over, you can score because you're effectively in distance. We might only play 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 in that area, but it just gives the forwards the chance. The ball comes from all angles, and the goalkeepers, they could save 4 shots in a row in about 6 seconds, and it really sharpens them up. So I'm a convert to this. I don't take strips down with me anymore. I might take some cones to mark out the edges of the pitches, but we certainly don't dribble down cones and I have to pass it through this area to get to that area type of thing. Because it just, you just read what's in front of you and play. Sorry, I'm waffling as usual.
There's a world championship. There's a world championship of dribbling around cones. It's coming up. It's going to be live on ESPN. So I'll send you the link.
That's dressage, isn't it?
Yes, yes, in hockey. Stuart, every time we have this conversation, it feels a little bit like we're preaching, or you are preaching to the converted. And I know these guys will go back to the AstroTurfs and the rugby fields and the driving ranges and so on and so on and so on, and the netball courts and the swimming pools. And they will have some conversations with, for example, some parents that have been through a very different learning experience, sporting experience, like we did a few years ago. There'll be other coaches that have been coaching perhaps for a number of years. Have you got? I know you got lots of tools in your toolkit, but have you got your sort of 2 or 3 golden nuggets to sort of turn around to these people and go, look, hello, this is my top 3 list. This is what I'm doing.
Well, the first thing I would say, I was thinking about this the other day, Juan, I've got a new response to any parents who say, why don't you do this, is doctors used to prescribe cigarettes to people. Said it was like, it's for the good for them, good for their health. So things move on. I think times change. We learn new things about the way humans learn, and actually, strangely enough, we've always known this, by the way. It's a very natural thing, but we think we know better than nature. That's how arrogant us humans are. And then, so as a result of that, we've convinced ourselves that we can do things in a more efficient and effective way. We've also got to remember that we've been encultured via education systems to think of education as being a pure input-output approach. The difference between teaching, this is Fred Shoemaker quote from a podcast called Teacher Stories. Fred Shoemaker is a really well-known golf coach, wrote a fantastic book called Extraordinary Golf. And he was very influenced by Tim Galway of Inner Game fame. And one of the things Shoemaker says is that teaching is about putting information in, whereas coaching is about bringing something out of somebody that's already there. I really like that conceptualization of coaching. And helping them to unlock it or unleash it or find it or whatever it is, or discover it or whatever it is. So when you reconceptualize coaching like that, like a sense-making process, a helping process, a guiding process, once you've got that into your mind, then you kind of start to operate in very, very different ways. So I articulate that to people. I want to place them as individual learners. This is about their individual journey, their individual capabilities. They're all different. And I want to be able to differentiate and individualize. That's the first thing. The second thing is, my most important factor is that if I've got 30 kids this week, I want 30 kids next week and 30 kids in a year's time and 30 kids the year after that. I want retention. I want them to keep coming back. I want them to enjoy it. I want them to have lifelong participation. And then the final thing is, I am actually helping them develop as well. It may not appear like that's happening in the session, but by the way, if you see improvement in a session, like tangible improvement in a session, it's usually something to be concerned about. It's fool's gold, because it doesn't retain often, because learning in sport doesn't happen that fast. It normally takes a little while. So if you want an evaluation of your coaching, I used to think that evaluation of my coaching was I wanted to see smiling faces at the end. Now I want to see slightly disgruntled faces. And the reason I want that is because you want to get them so they've it's nearly there. You've got the stretch point right when you've got people like, or coming up to you saying, I tried this thing and it was nearly there, and you want them going, yeah, great, that's the thing to work on. That's your little thing to go and take away. That's what you're looking for. Now you've got the stretch point. Now you've got the absorption. Now you've got the awareness taking place. So don't get me wrong, little ones, tiny little ones, smiling faces, no problem. But once they start to get to my under 14s age group, I like them to be a little bit grittier than that. And, it's nearly there. One final little thing, you might have heard me say this before. Carol Dweck, who created the growth mindset concept, she said, were you at the conference, Juan, when she said it? Don't know if you were. Yeah. I got her to come over when I was working in rugby, and she came over and did a conference, and there was all these blokes who look like Juan, they're like, rippling athletes. Yeah, all that. And she's tiny. She's absolutely tiny. She can't be more than about 4.5 feet tall. And she said, nobody comes home and says, honey, I had the most brilliant struggle today. And yet we all know that the learning is in the struggle, in the ugly zone. And yet we're always trying to make it nice and make it smooth and make it easy. And you do have some parents out there that are helicopter stroke, snowplow stroke, Winter Olympic parents desperately trying to push obstacles out of their children's way in the misunderstanding that if they get rid of the obstacles, their children will have a better path in life. Actually, what Carol Dweck's work tells us is the obstacle is the way, to use is it Ryan Holiday who wrote the book, The Obstacle is the Way? This idea of stoicism, of actually overcoming challenge, overcoming difficulty, appropriate difficulty. We don't want to get into the talent needs trauma realm because that's tosh. We want to get into just appropriate difficulty, challenge, learning, challenge point theory. Let's get beyond the next step, And then And that's where I bring the video game stuff in. Oh, you're doing quite well at level 1. Guess what? I've got level 2 for you now. Are you ready for level 2? Yeah, we're ready for level 2. No, I don't think you're ready for level 2. You're going to be scared by level 2, and then we bring in some little constraint and then change the game and move it on to something else, and then level 3 and level 4 and level 5. And that's why I use all that, just to get the challenge point just right. So anyway, there's a few thoughts that I would share. I'm quite open with parents. I very rarely get any difficulty. I mean, I don't know whether I'm just lucky or whatever, but they tend to come away from, most of my parents are pretty bought in, but I am quite open with them, and I do want to try and make sure that I'm conveying my why a lot, and so if you do have parents with different I've definitely lost some kids. I've got parents who've taken their kids elsewhere to have them drilled to death. Crack on. You're not getting that from me.
Yeah, I think she, going back to Carol Dweck, she also said something along the lines of, let's free them from the tyranny of now and give them the freedom of not yet.
That's right.
I think they were the two things that stuck to my head. And she's tiny, you're absolutely right. But what a wonderful woman.
Like a rock star.
Oh, absolutely. A-team, A-League. And Trevor Lee Christian, it's time to do your end of game. Who wants to be a millionaire?
I want to be a millionaire, Juan, definitely. No, thank you very much, Stuart. Pardon me, Stuart, that was fantastic. That was a brilliant hour. I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. I've taken so much from it, and I'm sure everyone who's been online tonight has had a good experience. So thank you for your time, Stuart. Really appreciate you giving up beer o'clock, essentially.
Delayed gratification. Like the marshmallow experiment. It's good for me. It's good for me. So thank you.
So you can have 2 now. You can have 2 beers. One.
I think it's a not yet, isn't it? Not yet.
So speaking of not yet, we've got,
the Moretti's out.
We'll give you a quick recap as well on who we've got left. So that's number 7. We've got 3 left, guys. So next up is on St. Patrick's Day with Sarah Kelleher, who's
Sarah Kelleher, my hero. She's the best. Love Sarah Kelleher. Coached with her for 2 years. Best time of my life.
Hey, steady.
So as Juan said, we've got the A-listers. So we've got Stuart, we've had Sergio, we've had Amy. We've now got Sarah coming up, and that's on 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day. So make sure you're wearing some green and have a pint of Guinness to hand. Although I think it is in the afternoon.
Sarah's from Cork, so yeah, I'm doing it on St. Patrick's Day. Wow.
Kind of Murphy's, surely then.
So please do get out for that. Although, yeah, you might not want to have your Guinness at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Not at 2 o'clock.
I think we've got 3 at 2 o'clock, John. All the rest of them in the evenings. So we're catering for a broad spectrum of people, not just yourself, unfortunately, John. After that, we've gone to Suzanne Brown with mental health awareness, and then we'll be finishing up in April with Richard Cheetham, so on the 5th of April. So tune in.
What a lineup! What a lineup, Juan. Suzanne Brown, Sarah Kelleher.
Brought the A-team for this one.
Wow.
Brilliant, Trev. Thanks for that. Massive thank you, Stuart. Great to see you as usual. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. And if you're watching this on demand, hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be seeing you very, very soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks a million.
Thank you, Juan.
Cheers, Trev. Cheers,
Juan.
Cheers, Stuart.
Bye,
thank you.
Have a good weekend.